recorder. Here we go. This is the second half. We're still talking about customers and customer analysis. And I just want to kind of share with you that this is much more extensive than a typical company does, but it's still not complete. It's not all the things you could do for customers. And we'll talk more about feedback mechanisms in a later one. But what we're doing now is just kind of continuing on from where we were. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the feedback. The first thing, this is just a quick slide. Wanted to talk to you about this particular, looking at now remember we talked about industrial B2B versus B2C, so business to customers. This is a business to business. And so they do work in San Diego County, Inland Empire, and LA and OC. And so they primarily work for these industries: mining, utilities, construction, and manufacturing. And so you can see really what the distribution is. So the issue then is, well, okay, we're looking for our customers, and we're trying to understand them, not ourselves, but we're trying to understand them. And you can see that the spread of manufacturing is huge in Los Angeles, Orange County, with I don't know how many thousands, thousands and thousands of them, compared to a much smaller group in the IE and even smaller than IE in San Diego. So Los Angeles, Orange County probably makes 3 times the manufacturing in terms of numbers of units. Well, all the numbers are down below. So we got 5,000 in Los Angeles, Orange County compared to 1,000 here and only 717 in San Diego. Now, the reason that I did this for them is that they were thinking they needed to open an office in San Diego in order to be able to get that market. And guess what? One of the owners has a house in San Diego. So, he's thinking, gee, I could spend more time down there. I'm thinking, wait a minute. Does that make any sense? We have to deal with reality in business. We can't. Now, if it's your business, sure, you can do what you want to, but you try not to allow your lifestyle to totally influence a new market you go into unless you're willing to lose some money. Well, what happened is that they ended up not opening it because I convinced them that there just wasn't the marketplace down there, number one, but the other piece to that is that they had not come close to doing business with 1,000 in the Inland Empire, let alone the 5,000 in Los Angeles and Orange County, and just another thousands just on the immediate fringes of the Inland Empire. So until I convinced them that until they have proper saturation in the marketplace, there's no reason to go to San Diego. As a matter of fact, it actually splits what your efforts are if you expand geographically too much. So what ends up happening is that you've got another market and you start sending resources to that market, not only people but money and trucks, and in this case they were going to have a small warehouse. So you have all of these facilities and things going on in San Diego. Meanwhile, right in your back door, you're allowing your competition a leg up on you because you have not totally saturated your marketplace. So remember when we talked about the PIMS principles. Those PIMS principles basically say you need to be the best quality and have a high, be the first, second, or third in your marketplace in order to be able to increase your margins. And remember, the margins for the lowest to the highest was 6 or 8 times higher. And so I was finally able to convince him that all you're going to do is hurt your margins and you're going to hurt your market share by expanding too rapidly in a geographic way. So you want to stick to the knitting and stay where you can really be meaningful to a particular marketplace. And I mentioned this to you also, but at the risk of being redundant, Red Fusion started its business in Redlands with the idea that we would focus only on Redlands, put all our advertising money in Redlands. We knew people in Redlands. We joined the chamber. We did all of the local Redlands things before we worried about San Bernardino and the East Valley. That was because our resources were small, because we felt like if we tried to reach out too far, it would just get out in front of us, and we'd be competing with a lot of other people, whereas we had a big advantage being in Redlands, 2 Redlands businesses. So we did that, and we literally became #1 in the Redlands market. Now, that's not to say that we didn't have a few businesses that fell in Loma Linda and San Bernardino. We did have a few. But the point is, we spent no resources trying to develop that business. It just fell in the door. Of course, it was a digital business, and so a lot of people can find us. At the same time, our search engine optimization was all about Redlands, websites, social, that was before social media, design and all the things that Red Fusion did. So we were able to focus on our core competencies, keep it local, and we were quite successful, and we achieved our goal in 3 years. When we decided to move to the next level, we expanded into the East Valley, and so we got involved in San Bernardino. We joined the chamber. We started doing marketing there. We began building up this San Bernardino name. We wrote articles about San Bernardino, the county, and the city, so that we could get the SEO working better. And we literally did exactly the same thing there. And within 2 years, we were the dominant player in San Bernardino. We did the same thing for the whole Inland Empire. Now think about this. We didn't have the resources or money to be able to expand into the Inland Empire until we had enough business from our San Bernardino East Valley marketplace. So as we grew, we had more money to be able to expand into a larger marketplace. To have tried to get into San Bernardino would have simply raised our visibility and created more competition. So instead, we just grew slowly, took care of it, and we used the moat strategy, although I didn't know that's what it was at the time. I always call that the keep your head down strategy. We tried to just be focused on our customers, so that customers would see us and that competitors didn't. It's really hard to do on the internet because they all have access to the same stuff. But nonetheless, we looked like we were a small local company to the few larger ones that were out there. And by the time we were going head to head with some, the 2 or 3 larger companies, we'd already grown bigger than them. And so we had more power. Literally, we had more money to market. We had more people to go out and do the job. So that was what enabled us to become the biggest in the Inland Empire. That allowed us on a national basis to make the claim that we were the largest website company in the 13th largest market in the United States. That sounds pretty impressive. Even now, I'm impressed. I think we shrank back to 15 or something like that during our Great Recession. But what that makes it sound like is that you're not just a local guy, you're a regional guy in a big market. Now, we weren't a city. There's no way we could have done this in Minneapolis or Los Angeles or even San Diego, even though the population's larger here than in San Diego. And we had, you can see we have more businesses here than San Diego. And so we're counting businesses, of course, and so the market was just fine here. We had plenty of business. We didn't have to go anywhere to do any other business. And we found that instead of going out and talking to people, that the demand was so high that we were able to schedule people to come and see us. And so if they wanted to come from Los Angeles, they'd have to get in the car and drive and see us because we were literally too busy with appointments to go drive and see anybody. And we would simply say to them, we're terribly sorry, but our salespeople are booked and they have to stay in the office in order to see everybody. And so if you'd like to meet with us, you'll have to come to our office. We'll set an appointment. And there were days when our conference room was booked solid. We could not get more appointments into the conference room. So I remember actually meeting, we had our restaurant above a restaurant. And I used to take meetings down in the restaurant because there was no place to meet. Of course, I didn't have an office. You know, everybody else had the offices, you know. I used to work out of the conference room, and so I got kicked out of there completely. That's why I had to move my office home. Anyway, enough about that. So that's geographic distribution, and taking just a broad brush look at what it means for your customers. Now, this is an interesting look at what borders and geographic anomalies can do to your marketplace. Some of you may have seen this, but this represents, it's just a rough representation, of a business in Riverside County. This line is the county line, and this line right here happens to be 91-215. So as it comes from one county into the other, there is a place within about a block and a half of the border that is it's like retail, tack, and feed. It was a kind of a fun, interesting business, big old barn-like store with a couple of acres of ground. And they sold everything from wire to saddles to feed, etc. And they sold it far and wide. People would drive a long ways. But the interesting thing is that when we took a look at their market by geography, looked at their customers, and we'll assume this is an equal, sort of it would have been a pie, and I need to redo this someday, but basically it graphically illustrates the size of the Riverside County market compared to the size of the San Bernardino market. It was about 35 or 40% San Bernardino. And you kind of go, why is that? And so we studied that to try and figure that out. And we even talked to customers and did customer surveys. Well, as it turns out, the only difference was the county line. People mentally thought that they were in Riverside County, and therefore it was too far to drive because they didn't know the exact address. It's sort of an industrial neighborhood. And so they wouldn't go. And some of these people would drive further from their home to the other closest one in order to buy their feed, just because it was in San Bernardino, and mentally they thought it was closer. So people are not rational. And this is where positioning is so important. So the work we did for them included, doing maps, showing a website, which was really new in those days. This was like 98 or 9. And so we got them on the web and we showed them a map so people could see where they were. And we began in all of their materials, we began to say, we are and I can't remember the exact, we're situated, 2 miles from the county line, to try and get more business from San Bernardino, because there was no reason why people wouldn't come there. And so, so that's another case. There are other situations that I've seen where people take a look at the map in concentric circles and they don't understand why it suddenly stops. And then you look closer, because it's a map, you can't do this from a database, because it's closer, because there's a river running through there, the people can't get there because there's no bridge. And so they go, oh, there's a river there. No wonder we can't get any people from that part of the neighborhood. Well, now you see, the market has changed. Geographically, they didn't ever have that market. And if you didn't know that by mapping it, or at least driving the area, you would assume the market is bigger than it actually is. And so you could make a real mistake if you're doing a geographic location analysis for somebody and not know that there is a big river in between one market and the next market. Okay, so I want to show you what some mapping and sort of querying here. This is more information about who are your customers and where are they in this particular case. So right here, you can see that there are several colors of dots all around. And I'll explain that in a minute, but these are different kinds of customers. And you can see, though, how they cluster. All of these green ones are sort of like in here, and then you've got some on the outskirts, and then here's a bunch of them here, and a bunch here. But then you come into some of these other neighborhoods, like here and here, they're all the red ones, a few green ones scattered, and then you've got some red up here. These are different kinds of customers. So what we were looking at is trying to identify where the next group of customers would be. And so we plotted these colors inside each of the, let's see, these are zip codes. These are 5-digit zip codes. So you can see here that we have different colors from gray, meaning nothing, to light blue to dark blue. And so the darker the blue means the higher density their best customers are. Doesn't mean there aren't potential customers or people living there, but these happen to be the very best customers. And so it was really clear, you can see these red lines. It was really clear where the next geographic locations would be. Of course, this is delivery service, so it's obviously important. So we had some teeny ones in here. We had a little bit bigger one here, which is really, really, very small area and a large density of people. Bigger area, pretty good density, and same here. Today, we have moved into every one of these areas here, including these little teeny ones, and not including that one, which happens to be downtown Denver. And so, those were good areas to go into, and we're kind of doing this again to see if it's changed, to see if people have moved around, but also to see how the new customer distribution is. This is something we do every several years. Now, here's another example. This is our area. You probably recognize it. The client happens to be a pest control company, sort of downtown Riverside over on Arlington. And they told me that they had a lot of business up in the mountains, a lot of business in Redlands, and they had a lot of business over in Pomona. And so they were regional in nature, and they needed to, at the time, they needed to do a lot of advertising in the press enterprise, which covered this whole area. Not as strong in San Bernardino and Redlands, but strong enough. And so, and then of course, they very weak up in the mountains. And so as we began to go through and take a look at their marketing program, we did this analysis, and it was really clear to me, because the first thing I noticed is that, well, and where is the business in Pomona? You can see there's no business in Pomona. They're just completely like off their rockers. They had no idea. Well, why? Well, that's because they were looking at the billing addresses. It turned out there were 2 or 3 big apartment companies that were headquartered in Pomona. Well, that doesn't mean anything. They're going to use somebody who's closer because it's cheaper for somebody local to take care of them. And so, and of course you love these big, contracts with 100 units or something like that. So they had a sales guy that was out there hitting the doors trying to open up business and couldn't really get any because they had no idea who they were looking for. They didn't know that they should be talking to the property management companies and not the property owners. They were smart enough to know that there was business with property management companies, but they didn't think that would be in Pomona. They were thinking, well, those guys would have all kinds of business in East Los Angeles, and so we don't want to go that far. So what we were able to do is to get them to take resources from Pomona and bring them back in to a closer area so that they could focus on what they were good at from a geographic perspective. Now, they did in fact have a nice little set here of Redlands business, some in San Bernardino, quite a lot of business up in the mountains, and you can see around Lake Arrowhead and Crestline area, they do some decent business. Well, it turns out one of their salespeople lives up there, and he's a good salesman, and he goes out and he gets the business. Fine. He's already there. He's got business that justifies it. But in terms of advertising, they were trying to cover the mountains with the San Bernardino, with the Riverside Press. And I basically kind of showed them that the Riverside Press had absolutely no circulation up there. And that was a bad idea to pay for advertising up there. And so instead, what they needed to do is focus on save the money here and do something different. Meanwhile, Redlands had and still has its own newspaper. They happen to own it now. The Riverside Press happens to own it now, but at the time they didn't. And it's cheap. And so they could save money by focusing just on the immediate areas around Riverside, advertise very pinpoint in Redlands, and then go to a local newspaper in Lake Arrowhead and do pinpoint advertising there, as pinpoint as you can do in a newspaper. And of course, that's still when people were doing a lot of reading in newspapers. That's all changed. And naturally, the website was part of the strategy. And we did a rebranding for them and some other things too. But that's an example of understanding the geography of your customers when it matters. It matters less now than it did, but it still does matter. These were the targeted areas where we really focused on, and we literally said, let's not worry about doing any advertising. We were able to cut in the other areas, and we were able to cut their budget and give them enough money to pay for about half of a new salesperson. So this, I think, I've shown you before. This is where we take a look at lifestyle. And if I'm redundant, just speak up and I'll go faster. I've given, because I've talked a lot about this particular subject to a lot of different groups. So Mosaic, there are 3 large companies in the United States that have incredible amounts of information on every one of us. Equifax is one of them, and as a matter of fact, right here in Redlands, Esri is another one. It's called Mosaic, and the other system was owned by another big credit company. So what they do is they break all of us into groups, and they call them cohort groups. And so if you have the same spending behavior, that is looked at a lot more than other characteristics. So they don't look at the typical demographic stuff like race, religion, sex, etc. They really look at, what do you spend your money on? How do you spend it? What cars do you drive? Where do you live? Those kinds of behavioral things to do a much better job at finding customers. So we do this with the dairy, and so we know out of all these different groups that they go from one extreme to the other. And this is just a very simple summary of all the information that's available. So here you have high income, and it's an opposite pole over here on the right called low income. So from high income to low income. So sort of going this direction back and forth cat a corner, you are seeing individual groups going from very high income to very low income. So then you also look at urban over here on the right, and then cat a corner, rural on the other side. So those are 2 opposite poles. So for the most part, you've got urban people in this area, urban people in this area, and you've got rural people over in this area. Now, when you take a look at income, you can see that the high income is on this side. So these are high income rural people, and these are low income urban people. Then you can do the same thing between renter and owners, and then retirement versus wage earners, and what they call American Heartland, which is probably a nice way of saying old white guys, I don't know, versus multicultural. So, you know, politically correct. Even in years and years ago, they were trying to do that. So when you take a look then at these characteristics, and as I said, oh, and then it's also families versus singles. Huge difference in what people buy and whether or not you have a family or not. And so when you take a look at all of these, where do you think that the customers at the dairy would be? Anybody have a guess on that or any comment?
I think I remember, so
Oh, no, that's cheating. You have to do it
so I don't want to say it.
Go ahead.
But that was the bottom right corner, the AO03s. I think you mentioned that it was, if I'm not mistaken, that's where they were, right?
Yeah, you're right. That is where they are. And so they have a high family mix, high income. They tend to be owners more than wage earners, but about in the middle. A little closer to owner than wage earners. And they tend to be in suburbia, so halfway between urban and rural, okay? They have a mix between American heartland and multicultural, so that's sort of a mix, but no singles, not particularly retired, although I will say that it's spotty, but we've got a couple of E's in there, and a couple of C's and a couple of B's. And so if you kind of watch the mouse, let's see, I should have a tool to draw, but if you go along this way, if you watch the mouse, it really kind of comes like this, right there. And we do have some singles, and we do have some retired women who drink a lot of milk. And so they're in there too. But for the most part, when we look at the 80-20 rule, we're talking about they're all right here. You got 6 or 8 cohorts, and that represents well over 50% of their business. So the question then I would say to you is, well, if that's the case, it's like, why should we go over here and start talking to these J guys? Don't even have to know who they are, but let's not waste our time, because they haven't naturally gravitated to our products. Would we someday? Yeah, but it depends on what? It depends on the available market for these people. So when we go back here and I tell you that these dark blues are those people, now you can pull it together and see, oh, okay, it makes a lot of sense. It's very logical. We've got these areas here. They're right next to this area. They're, pretty close to, let's go get these guys. And so that's in fact what we did, and that's been successful. I think we have grown from 22 to 30,000 stops in that period of time that we did this particular evaluation. So it's been very successful. This is how you make your business actually grow. Okay, now we're going to move into a slightly different subject. And this here has to do with, are there trends based on product type and things that people buy within the company that also have are in a specific group? Now, this tends to be sort of right from bottom to top, or top to bottom, doesn't matter how you want to measure it, from one end of the scale to the other. And so it's not exactly linear, because within this whole A group right here, you've got 3 or 4 different subgroups of people that, are very different. I mean, there are quite a few differences between the AO5 and the AO1 group. They don't exactly spend the same, but they, generally speaking, they make about the same kind of money, and they live kind of in the same houses, and they kind of have the same cars, but they might have something strange, like the AO1s and 2s might not have any children anymore, but the AO4s and 5s might have more children. And so we're going to sell more milk based on whether there are kids in the household. And so those kinds of things happen. So what we did is we took a particular product. I can't remember what it was, but we wanted to see if there was any difference between this gradual change of kinds of people. And you can see that, in fact, there is on this blue group, there is a trend line that goes down. In other words, more of these people on this end buy it compared to people on this end. But on the other hand, and I think this is whole milk. Yeah, no, this is 2% milk. That's what this blue line is. This right here is whole milk. And so as the education goes down and the financial ability goes down, whole milk goes up. Now, this was interesting at the time. Well, was there anything we could do about it? Well, we realized that there were some people, the educated folks tend to be up in here. I mean, they all have some education. These tend to be the highly educated ones. The interesting thing here is there's a disconnect. Whole milk is not bad for you. But they think so because they know a lot about a lot of things. And you have had the American government say that fat is bad for you and your heart for a long time. That's been rescinded. The whole food pyramid is gone. The government realized that was wrong. Fortunately, it only took them 20-some years to change it. And so now the pyramid is something different. So they just talk about dairy now, and whereas they used to say, oh, you have to have, low-fat dairy or drink skim milk. Well, there's a little problem with that, particularly in some markets. And that is that whole milk is easier to digest than skim milk. And so in certain markets, like Hispanic markets, there's a higher incidence of lactose intolerance. And so a lactose intolerance person who drinks skim milk will have a stomach ache. But when you have a whole milk, there's more cream in there. As a result, if they drink whole milk, they don't have a stomach ache because they can digest it properly. So some things are not what they appear to be. And so it's the responsibility of a business owner to understand the facts and then make a reasonable decision as to whether or not it makes any sense to try and change people's minds. Well, milk consumption has been going down 1 or 2% a year since 1950. And so as almond milk and all of the other pretend milks are out there crowding the space, it's pretty important to understand exactly which product can fit within the whole marketplace. So as a result, we made the decision to start educating customers about the facts about milk and being completely and totally honest and referring to the studies that were cited in every single case. So no claims without scientific evidence. Of course, studies and science sometimes gets mixed up and it's interpreted wrong, and so you have to work through that. But we made every effort to give people the real story because we didn't want us to backfire. Well, this is now reversed, and now we find that whole milk is going up among this group and among the customers as a whole. And we have slightly flattened out milk drinking because people are drinking more milk because whole milk is easier to drink. So that is why you study your products and your customers to understand where they interface. Let's see. This one is really digging into it much deeper, and you can kind of see, we won't spend much time on this, but we did homogenize 2%, 1% fat-free, et cetera, in order to delineate that a little further. Okay, so let's move on now to sort of like the next piece here, which is to look at targeting new customers. And yeah, new customers, as well as doing some additional analysis. So we want to talk briefly about feedback loop. This is really an important thing. And if we go back, I think I have this slide on here. I may not. This is really big. Well, okay, I won't keep looking for it. You'll be bored enough as it is. Oh. So what we're trying to do here is just jump into, there we go. Oops, I'm going the wrong way again. Feedback. Where did I find it? Here we go. It's important that you always have a continual feedback loop from your customers. Now that's as simple as asking them after you finish each project, or you sell a customer if you're face-to-face, and so what do you think about it? But it's not as good as after they use the product for a while, because they don't figure out whether there's a problem with it until they've used it. So it's always nice to be able to follow up. And nowadays it's easy to do with services like, SurveyMonkey. And of course, you can do surveys on all kinds of other products now, including Facebook and others. So there's just a real ease of doing these. The problem, of course, is that because there are so many survey tools, customers are less inclined to actually use them, and you still need to have a certain number of customers in order to be able to know it's statistically valid. So you want to make sure you get enough percentage back. And we can talk more specifically about survey methods in a later time. But just a couple of things. You want to make sure that you write the questions so that they're relevant. Now, this is a little trickier than it might sound. And sometimes you might write a question that would lead a customer, and you don't want to lead them. You want to give them a straightforward opportunity to give you the real answer, not one you're looking for. The information is useful both the short, immediate term and the longer term. So we have done surveys now for this exact survey I'm going to show you. I think since 1994, a really long time. And we do it used to do it every 3 or 4 years, because we did it via mail and we had to manually compile things by putting all the answers in spreadsheets. And then I had to go through and do all of that. And that was really boring, but that was part of the job. So anyway, that's the way we used to do it. And now you can do a good questionnaire, send it out immediately to thousands of people, and it comes back and the questions are all answered and it has charts. So it's really nice now. And then of course, what happens when you have a long-term view and you compare one survey with the other survey, you end up being able to identify trends based on changes in the data. And that has been so useful for us over time. And it's been useful for any client that we've had for a long time, particularly the B2C customers. Okay, so here's a milk delivery, and this is a long time ago, but it shows you how many bounces we had, how many clicks we had, and in this case, we had 683. We typically get 6,000 back nowadays, and we have to go through and actually take a sample of that because it's just too big. We don't need that big of a sample. So we're going to go through these pretty fast, but I wanted to give you a good idea of the kinds of things you can ask. First of all, we ask up front, what's your overall attitude? Why do you do that? You want them to give an unabashed flash response so that they can just say, oh yeah, that's pretty good, or it's okay. Because what happens when you ask specific questions, they kind of change their mind a little bit. And now you're getting another side of the issue. So here, the scale is negative, 1 or 2 on the scale down here, up to 7 over here. So we've always had a very good uh, difference here. So mostly positive. Now here's where we begin to look at the trend. We go from, this only goes back to 2000, but we go from 2000 to 2013, and this is an older survey. Obviously, we've done 3 or 4 since, and so we can see if there's any difference, and we'll see that there are some occasionally. We wanted to know how long do people stay with the company, and so you can see here that there's an awful lot of similarity from one to the other. But we had a big drop here way back in 2000 where people were staying longer, but they were really small by comparison then. Then we ask characteristic questions about the product. Does it taste good? Yeah. Do you think there's a superior value? Now, notice here that we have asked a different kind of question in the middle of some other product questions, and that is, how do you think the product compared to the price is? And so we're asking them to value it for us, which is a hard question a lot of times, and this is the toughest one. And so you can see here that over the years, it's changed. And so we had a pretty decent in 2000. It got a little worse in 2005, got better again, stayed better. And by now we're really focused on this. We are focused all of our communications towards talking about value, talking about price. Now this price is maybe double what you buy it in the store. So you can see why it's an uphill battle to try and create value when you're charging twice as much as the alternative. So the quality has to be absolutely incredible. The service has to be absolutely incredible, and the brand, the image has to be absolutely incredible in order to overcome this high price. And so that's what we focused on. This is our hardest problem, and why we have pretty much a high turnover even today, even though it's gone down. Now, we ask things like, are we environmentally responsible? Well, they use glass bottles, and so we've always scored well on that. Now, here's another question. You notice this? We ask, is it expensive? That's kind of the same question as trying to figure out value. But you can see that for the most part, people think it is expensive. You know, the ones who are said, well, not so bad, but most of them are somewhere in the middle. So you only score about a 4 or 5. But if you go back to superior value, when they put the whole piece together, you can see how much better we scored here. Because we did a good job on explaining the value, but it doesn't mean it's cheap. It's still expensive in their mind, and we have to remember that. So we have to always deliver top quality. There's just absolutely no question about it. And of course, the PIM survey illustrated that. That's why we learned that. That's why this is happening with this client, is because we've really focused on that to create an incredible experience. And yes, it costs more money, but it's better. Are we friendly? Excellent on that. Rich flavor. This is another taste one. Now we're mixing this all up because it randomly changes these. But we mix it up because we want people to kind of be jogged. We don't want to lead them down a path. Is there any no waste? Well, what does that mean? Well, for many years, the moniker was fresh taste, no waste, and delivered right to your door, something like that. So what was happening is that our advertising and our communications message was being parroted back to us. That tells us we were doing it right because people were telling us what we hoped they would believe. Is it natural? And for the most part, they say yes. Is the delivery good? Well, you can see how unbelievably positive it is. How many times out of thousands of people can you deliver about 85 or 90%, and they say that it's the best? And in this particular case, a 5, 6, or 7, you got 95% of the people saying you're doing okay. Timely billing. Have you fixed the problems? Now, here's an interesting thing is that you say, well, gee, what's the difference from one year to the next? Well, as we're popping along here, it goes up a teeny bit here, have a spike. This is like 400% of the resolution of problems as we had 3 years before, and it hadn't gone down that much. We discovered, so we dug deeper, we discovered that there was one employee that was treating customers rudely, and it wasn't picked up in the office. And we were losing customers as a result. That person was fired, and the next couple of years it goes down. So you can fix problems with information. And you can, whereas on what grounds would you fire somebody if you thought they weren't as nice to people? You've got to know, because you have to be fair to the employees. The ones who do a great job need to know that the ones who's doing a lousy job don't get to stay, and vice versa. But in order to do that, you have to have data. Great on product quality. Whoops, excuse me. This had to do with how often the calls were coming in. Were you satisfied? Were they polite and courteous? So you can see this is a big, long questionnaire. And we say to them up front, we do this every 2 years is all. And of course, we only send them to about a random group of about 30% now. So we could have a lot more. And we don't want to bug them all by asking them too many times, because then the returns would go down. Do you read Mooo News? Now this sounds a little crazy. Mooo News is the communication device. It's a physical newsletter that has been put together for many years. I think we just did our 29th or 30th edition, something like that. So it's been around a long time. This is why, because whenever we ask them, do you read Mooo News? At least 80% say yes. That's why we do it. We spend a lot of money on it. It costs them thousands and thousands of dollars to design and print 30,000 copies every month. It's pretty expensive to do. Not as a percentage of the revenue, but still. Let's see. How do you like to change your order? And then here's where we get into online satisfaction. How often do you go online? Well, so you can see here that this is begin to be adoption rates. So now we are down the road. 98% of all of our customers are online. We were breaking ground at this time, and we needed to know and understand, does it make sense to go online? And you can see absolutely, well, you can't see from here, but we were on our way at this time. So in other words, we had 40, 70, 80% who went online occasionally. So that was enough. Now we were trying to find out, do you know about our auto pay? And yes, so our communication worked. Are you aware of our new email statements? Yes. Have you ever changed your order using your phone or a tablet? Because we're trying to figure out what's going on. Well, here you had over half of them had never tried that. Today, over half of them use their phones. So that's, and we can tell over time how that's worked. How many children under 18? This is really key. And so we just ask them, how many kids are home? And so we can identify how many there are. And of course, most of them don't have any, and here are the kids. So we can calculate that out exactly. Now, this is a good question. And this is a question that should be on almost all customer satisfaction surveys. Have you recommended us? Have you recommended our product? And when we can come back with an 85 or 90% rate, we know we're doing most things right. If you come back, and it's more typical to have 10 or 20% come back and say that. Now, it doesn't matter how big you are here. You can have a few clients, or you can have a million products selling. You want to know whether or not they recommend you, and it's a good question for every size of business. Okay, now these are some tools here. We're going to switch gears again as we get into the competition. Now, if you remember, we're going around the circle, and we're at the competition level right now. And so, we've looked at customers, and we're going to look at competition. Now, this is interesting because you want to know what your competition is like. And everybody wants to say, we don't have any competition. but we know that's rarely true. Only if you have a well in the desert within 100 miles or 200 miles do you not have any competition. But nowadays you'd say, oh, the competition is the Coke you've got in the car as you're driving down the highway. But for camel drivers, there was no competition. So here are some places you go to get county business patterns, which is where we got the numbers I was showing you, which seemed like they were just a touch out of order. I might have gotten that slide. It maybe should have been here. The government census has tons of information on industry and sub-industry. The Bureau of Economic Analysis has tons of information as well. And then there are 2 or 3 kinds of data that you can get from the census. So when you're trying to figure out about your customers, you can find out a lot about your industry, not specific customers, simply by going to the data that's there for free. When you're trying to figure out a little bit more about a smaller group, I use InfoUSA because you can buy a list from them and you can do a market report that will actually do some calculations for you, so that you can take a look and you can ask questions like how many businesses are there in the Inland Empire that are between 100 and 500 employees. So if that's your target market, or trying to identify your target market, you can do that. Or you can say, give me all of the businesses, but break them down by the size of revenue or the employee size. And so now you can come up with some basic data about the kind of business you're in. It doesn't work so well for certain kinds of businesses. So since we're talking about restaurants, you can find out some things about broad categories of restaurants, but you can't find out some narrow categories. For instance, you couldn't really tell the difference between a Mexican restaurant, a sit-down restaurant, and one that is primarily pick up at the window. You have to go to other sources to find that. But this is an interesting and low cost way to find that out. You can go to Experian, which is where you have to pay money, but that's where you get the really detailed information that I've shown you, called the mosaic codes. That's what we use, and we've done that for many years. Of course, internet competitive analysis is so easy to do nowadays. All you do is begin mentioning the industries, and here you can do an industry or the sub-industry or a specialty, and you can see where your competition is online simply by doing a Google search. Man, there's no easier way to do it than that. What you do is you make sure you're careful about selecting the keywords that your customers are going to use, not what you think they use, but what your customers are using to describe your product. Then you can find out where your business is, and be sure to limit it by location so that you're really not looking at people who are way outside. And by the way, one of the little problems that we've always run into that is really unique to the Inland Empire is that Google didn't know the Inland Empire existed until maybe 8 or 10 years ago. They thought it was San Bernardino and Riverside County. And so, when you do something in the Inland Empire, when we were actually looking at the Inland Empire as a keyword, we realized it wouldn't do any good because Google didn't know what that was. So we began to use keywords like located in the Inland Empire, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties. Eventually, Google figured it out because so many of us, and we did a lot of websites like that, but so many others also put that in, and they just described, like they would say, we delivered to anywhere in the Inland Empire. Well, they did eventually figure it out because Google is pretty smart. And then the other research tools that I've mentioned are customer feedback systems, surveys. And if you have a sales team, you want to have them do sales interviews, or you do interviews with your customers directly. So all of those ways, you want to build a whole information feedback system that is formal. So you might be small, but you want to be thinking about, okay, on a regular basis, I'm going to ask questions. It could be when you see them at the end of a project, but you want to get feedback. And you don't want to just store it in your head. You want to put it on a spreadsheet so that as you accumulate the data, it eventually begins to mean something and you can begin to see trends. Trends are what drive your ability to innovate, and innovation is what is key to small business. Okay, so here we have a case study just to show you what you can do with some of this government data. So here you have this is the SIC code. Today it's the NAICS code. Either one of them is fine. There is a translation opportunity, so you can go between one and the other because, I don't know, 15 years ago, they only had the SIC codes. But you can take a look that we've put the count in as a percentage. We've taken a look at the sales and then the market percentage just to get a sense for what it was. Do an analysis. What are the percentages? You don't know if it means anything until you do it. I call it discovery because I don't always know what I'm looking for. A lot of times I don't see it until it shows up in the data. So here's one where we were taking a look at certain industries, food manufacturing, beverage, tobacco, wood products manufacturing, cement. I'm not sure why these are mixed up. I can't remember the client, but you know, you've got big difference in numbers here. So if you are going to try to sell something to beverage and tobacco products, of course, it's 99% beverage. That means that you've got, in this particular case, we're talking about how many employers there were in that week and the first quarter and the number of establishments. So these are employee numbers, but you can see here, there are only 24 of them. If you happen to be selling wineries, sorry, there are only 11. So you better find something else to do if all you do is sell corks for wine, because you probably can't make a living unless you sell all 11 of them, and they have to be pretty big volumes. If you're selling bottles, you have a better chance. If you're selling equipment that costs $100,000, you got a lot better chance. The problem is with only 11, everybody knows who they are. And so you have to build relationships. But you see how it begins to say how your marketing approach should be by understanding the numbers. This is how you create successful marketing plans, is by knowing all the data that you can find out. Okay, so that in a nutshell. Now let's talk a little bit about competition as it relates to how you position your company. Here is a example, and I'll do my best, Matt, to try and explain this, where on one side we have customers and you're sort of on a chessboard. You're somewhere on a board and your customers are on one side and your competition is on the other side. And what you have is a playing card, or maybe it's a big card, or maybe it's a flat, a small card, or it's long and skinny, but it's a different shaped card. And your job is to try to figure out how to block your competition from knowing who your customers are. That's what we call emplacement. So what can happen is that you can move the card and you can allow viewership to a lot more people or a lot less people. So in this particular example, the card is sort of average size, I guess. And when you move really close to your customers and you have a strong relationship with them, you can block the largest part of your competition. They can't see who they are because you completely cover them up with relationship marketing. You know who they are. You don't expose who they are. You might have a LinkedIn account, but it's so big and there's so many people on there that you couldn't identify which customers are yours. And you want to think about if you want to link to customers or not. That's actually a strategy. You want to consciously decide how your LinkedIn page is going to work. So that's one approach. But then you can try this other approach where you can, and by the way, you're protecting a few customers from a lot of people. But if you squat down and move in the middle, you can protect more customers from a larger percentage of the marketplace. And then if you get really close to your competition, you can protect even more customers than you could the other way around. So this is just an illustration. It's just an illustration to show that the way that you choose to do your marketing and the conscious decision to do marketing, positioning, and emplacement can change how your customers see who you are. And if you have an online business, you have a much better opportunity, and a relationship business, you have a much better opportunity to guard your customers from getting stolen by somebody else. Now, for those of you who say, oh, I'm just a little business, etc., but I don't have to worry about the big guys. Well, it depends on the industry, and we've talked a lot about that. There are big customers that will crucify you if you're not careful. Big competition. So here we have the three types of markets. I think we've already gone through this, haven't we? Innovation, a new crack, high growth, mature, traditional. It is right in here that we're seeing all of the growth in some of those delivery companies. Very, very high growth. And so very seldom do we have such a germane group of businesses that have something's really going on right now that fits in this category. It doesn't happen very often in my examples. I think we've talked about market intensity, and so I'm going to go through these pretty quick. What end of the scale are you on? In this particular case, market intensity for coffee is way over here, highly intensive competition, whereas doing menus for restaurants is very low competition. So we've got two extremes here between the two firms. Graphic design and marketing, Lucy, you're a lot closer to the intense one, except for the fact that you differentiated for nonprofits, and that pushes you a little bit closer to the well. So it makes it a little bit better. If you could find a big enough niche for a specific kind of nonprofit, you could push yourself even closer. And then what you do is you would focus on, I don't know, you could focus on child placement agencies, which has its own unique problems. And it's a very tough market. And you're marketing to both parents and to well, let's see, you're marketing to the child's mother and to the adoptive parents. So you have two markets that you're bringing together. So there's a lot required in that kind of a company to get right, and not very many people understand them. So just that as an example. And I think we're nearing the end here. Let me take a quick look. No, there's more. But I think we've run out of time, and this is a good place to stop because we're getting into the really dry stuff, which has to do with forms and how to fill the stuff out and that kind of stuff. More of a workshop kind of thing than what we're doing here. So I think I'll stop here and open it up. Any comments, questions that you have to kind of wrap this up for today?
Well, I did have one, Ron. John Mills here.
Oh, John, I didn't know you were here. Nice to see you.
Yeah, yep. I did have one. I love to nuance your words once in a while, and you said customers are not rational.
Yeah.
And I'd like to actually say that you're actually wrong on that, and you've more than wrong. You've proven yourself to be wrong.
Okay, I want to hear this.
And the reason why I say that is that you have proven that when you give customers real information and you educate them and you allow them to see the fullness of what it is, they have to be rational. They come around and they migrate. So I would argue that actually customers may be ignorant of the truth, said in the nicest way.
Yeah.
But if you can actually explain to them why, the railroad line and the bridge are in the way, but really we've got a different zip code, but it's only 30 seconds out of your way.
Yeah. Good point. You did catch me just a little bit there. And so I will agree that there were cases where we were able to use information and change people's minds, but it's hard. It's really hard to do. And oftentimes it doesn't work at all. But here is probably a little closer definition. We have not really been too successful in changing the cognitive mind. We have changed the emotional mind. So it's much easier say in your first business, it's much easier to go to a parts specification engineer and show them the tolerances that you're dealing with and have them make a decision than it is to get a milk drinker to reverse their emotional decision to buy non-dairy milk and get them to come back to milk. So when you're in B2B, yeah, it's a lot easier to do. When you're in B2C, it's the positioning that convinces them to change. Now, keep in mind, the definition of positioning is to place a certain image in the mind of your customer. And so with the dairy, for instance, we've placed the whole concept of the wholesomeness of milk, the cleanliness of a glass bottle, the returnability, the environmental thing. I mean, all of the attributes that we could identify and find, we have placed that in their mind as best that we could. We've been fairly successful at that. But you could argue that decision for the dairy is almost an irrational decision because they're paying two and a half times more for milk that you can only marginally, if you're really an aficionado like myself in milk, you can only marginally tell that it's different. And in fact, I think you could probably train people how to taste milk, and they have milk tasters just like wine tasters. And most people still couldn't tell the difference between a fresh bottle and one that's 4 days, 5 days old. And so what happens is their decision ends up being an emotional one. And that's why we do positioning, because unfortunately, most consumers make very emotional decisions. They're not practical or logical. So as the business owner, you've got to be logical and practical. But you're right, and I'm glad you brought this up. You've got to be very logical about the fact that consumers make emotional decisions. And that, I don't know how that's going to change in the future. It feels to me like our society is becoming less and less rational, not more rational. Good comment, thanks. You can always plan on John trying to trip me up. Anybody else? Come on, give it a try.
I have one.
Yeah, Christian.
Is there certain stages in between a company's lifetime on when to involve these type of surveys with their clients, or is it just great even if it's a startup company, you know, already starting off with a brand new product, already having those surveys in place?
Yeah, I would say you start before your startup. You start your surveys. If you have a target market, you know, somebody who thinks is your audience, that's a great time to start. You know, if it's practical, a great time to start your feedback loop with your prospects, not your customers. You know, you want to find out what the market acceptance is going to be, and market research does a ton of that kind of thing. And they pay big bucks in order to be able to get that information. There is a service on SurveyMonkey, which I love, and it's relatively inexpensive. And that is that you can put your survey together, and if you don't have any customers to send it to, you can actually pay them to use their panelists to answer your survey. So, for instance, if you wanted to know what your typical awareness of, say, your brand is in the Inland Empire, you could do a survey, and you would put your competitors on the list and just say, would you please tell us what you have, the brands that you have familiarity with, And then you list 6 or 8 companies, your competitors, you'd be one of them, and they would go from 1 to 5, or they'd say no, 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 yes, yes, no. And then you'd be able to get a sense like, oh, well, there is no brand recognition among this couple of companies, but these guys have brand record or top of mind. And so that would tell you right away, we've got something to overcome here, because 90% of the people know, well, the press enterprise, just to use that example again, they know the paper is there. That was probably in 15 years ago, it was 95%. But we'll do a survey right now. Hold your hand up. How many of you have ever read the press enterprise? Wow, okay. So we have what, about half? Yeah, well, John's there, a little over half. I'm going to say Matt probably didn't.
I've read it before.
Oh, okay. So we're like 75%. Okay, so that's higher than I thought. So you see, Christian, my assumption was that today, in a typically younger audience, that not very many people had read it or even know of it. But I was wrong. So you see, you need data in order to be able to try and mitigate your own intellectual and emotional presuppositions. That's why data is always important. So the answer is, as soon as you start thinking you're going to be in business, start thinking about how you're going to get that information. Surveys is an area to do that. So good question.
And I have one more if you have the time.
Yeah, sure. As long as anybody wants to listen, we'll go.
One section that you were talking about was one of the main goals is blocking your competitors from knowing who your customer is. Now, let's say it's a startup company that is in its industry. It already has the bigger companies that are where they have the recognition is 100%. Everybody knows what those brands are. How do you try to hide or start into an industry like that? Try to hide your clients from them, where it's kind of like already everything exposed.
Yeah.
Now from that, you just have to try to, I guess, maneuver your marketing in a way that you just take a little bit of their clients away from their pool of clients.
Well, as soon as you start taking clients away from them, they're going to know really quick about the second time that happens. However, it doesn't mean that they would be too, and it depends on what you're selling. But I can tell you with the dairy that was a strategy for a long time. I mean, a long time. There were 4 dairies at the time in the market that did home delivery. One of them had 70,000 customers, and the dairy had, I think, 2,000. So you can see there's a big difference. You got a big Goliath and a little peanut on the other hand. And then there were 2 other dairies that were a little bit bigger than we were. And so when we started, we decidedly stayed out of the geographic territories where the other dairies were strong. And that was a keep your head down strategy. And when I say it took us a long time, I mean it took us 15 years before we took our head out of the sand, because we were able to stay incognito for about 7 or 8 years. And they were so big that they just thought that this was a toy, that there was no way there's going to ever be competition. Now, had they discovered that this was a serious competitor and they put money into it, they could have put us out of business without any question at all, because all they had to do is take their 20 or 30 people that were selling and make sure that 3 or 4 of them were in the exact area we were working at all times. But they didn't pay attention, and we were able to grow and grow and grow and grow a little at a time and a little at a time until we finally got to the place where we feel and felt as though we had a financial stability so strong that it wouldn't matter if they came after us. And that was only about 5 or 6 years ago. So you can see, when I say long-term strategy, I mean long-term. And that has worked extremely well. So how do we keep it separate? One of the things that we excelled at was our printed materials. and we developed an image of all those things I just mentioned, and we were able to communicate that with the leave behind at the door. And it took years and years, but eventually what happened is that people began to differentiate us as the high quality company and the other one as the mass company, the big guys. And so going against the big guys is always better by simply beating them at service and at quality. And if you can match their price, then then you beat them on image. And so when we go back to the value triangle, the diamond, the value diamond. At first we were lower on quality, lower matched on service, and we had an image that was lower, and our price was a little higher. Well, there's no way that's a winning combination. So immediately we beefed up service to be better. We started working on quality, which is a very technical thing to do, because you can get an air pocket in one of the pipes in the farm, and it'll turn your taste into aluminum taste, and it's just air. So it's very complex to get that fixed and working, but nonetheless, the money and time and effort was spent to make sure that that was right. And then I will say that we absolutely annihilated them in terms of branding. And so that's how we beat them. And then we went dollar for dollar. Whatever their prices were our prices. So we kept this all to ourselves. The printed materials, we never let them get out of the hands of the salespeople. They were told you can leave them behind with a customer, a prospect, but you cannot give them to anybody who you suspect. And so we did quite a lot of that until the internet came along, and then it was sort of like free for all. Anybody could take a look and see what's going on. And we had a lot of discussions about, should we put our prices on, and should we show them the products? What should we do? But this company was so big and so old, with an old guy who at the time was 72 or 3. So we're talking about 25 years ago. So they just ignored our online presence. They thought it was folly. We had 5 years of good growth before they ever figured it out. And so it was partially because they were stupid. But now, as I mentioned, the cash hoard is so powerful that if they decided to ramp up their sales force, we could hire twice as many people as they would ever hire. And even if we lost money, we wouldn't yield any ground, because that's how powerful a company is today. So that's kind of how you do it. But sooner or later, you got to put your head up. And the area, Christian, where it's easiest to do is when is through relationship marketing. If you know your customers really well, they won't switch unless they're mad at you. We tried to do that in a surrogate way with the dairy by making it as personal as we possibly could, even though it's 8 or 10 customer service people dealing with 30,000 people. We try, and because we have, the digital wherewithal to show all of the information and all the history and everything about the customer right on the screen when they call, they feel like they know each other. They know when the last call came in. They can tell that something happened, 3 months ago, and they can say, did it work out okay? I see that we credited you for that. Did that work out okay? Can we give you an extra bottle of this or that, or whatever it is? It's like, fix the problem, no questions. Every customer service person is empowered to give money to the customer. Everyone. And that's how you keep the customers from looking around. So that's kind of a long answer, but it's kind of a complex question. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Anything else? Great. Well, good session, everybody. Let's see, Christian, I owe you a email, so I'll get that out to you pretty quick.
Okay.
Good. Thanks, everybody, for coming, and we'll consider. John, were you on when we talked about changing to Wednesday? Yes. You're muted. I'll just assume you were. Well, at any rate, that should be, yeah, there you go. Now you're not muted.
Yeah. No, that would be a good thing.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so if we can count on you, we're going to have you do a couple of these programs. John's doing some new stuff you guys are going to be interested in that has to do with personnel. It's a little bit like the 16 PF that we most of us took. Similar to that, only building groups, working with people, team development, that sort of thing. And so we're gonna have him come and kind of demonstrate that and show you what, you know, it's not the kind of thing little companies are going to jump in and spend a lot of money on because you may not be able to afford it. But it's the kind of thing that will give you the understanding for hiring, how it needs to work in the future, how groups come together, and how to deal with people, and that includes your customers. So it's very relevant in terms of the interpersonal skills. So
I've got a 2-minute wrap up just on the subject you were talking about.
Okay.
Indianapolis, back in the 90s, a friend of mine, Doyle Minton, was the vice president of Time Warner. And Time Warner, back in those days, they had a geographically described marketplace. And he was stuck in the middle of this thing as a vice president. There were no more homes being built, and it had pretty much saturation. And each year he had a 2% growth, but that wasn't very good. So he came up with, right on line with what you just said, Ron, he came up and said, you know, what is the cost of us losing a client? So he tracked the cost of losing a client, and, you know, losing a client wasn't that expensive. Okay, what's the cost of a new client to replace him? Well, you got to have a truck roll, you got new equipment, you got to throw in the new cable and all this. And it came down to about $500 was the cost of a new client. And then he thought to himself, because he had an accounting background, what are we spending on keeping disgruntled clients? And he went out and surveyed. They had 35 people working in their help center. And basically, at the end of the day, they were losing 2.5% less than they were gaining every month. So they were losing about 7% and gaining 5%. And so he said, okay, what say we do this? We empower all our client service people to give away $200 of free service to the clients that are on the edge. Now, bear in mind, it's not installation, it's not trucks, it's not hard material. This is, you know, the Hollywood pack or the Disney Channel or something. It doesn't cost them very much. He turned it around. He became vice president, got nominated as manager of the year, and then he got promoted to New Jersey, and he was the head of the New Jersey and New York operation because his 2% went to 5.5% growth. He was landlocked, and his cost of doing it went down.
Right. Well, and you know, that's the answer. If you run out of marketplace, the answer is you have to do something different. And in this case, it's get your turnover down.
And yep, all the way. That was what, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
He ended up heading up Florida after that for another company, and has done extremely well because his brain was always looking for ways to be at the business bottom end. He was a business manager first.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like he used numbers to inform his direction, and that's key. That is key. So
he was rational, Ron.
Oh, right. Rationality. That's good. Okay, great. Enjoyed it. It was a good meeting, everybody. We'll see you all in 2 weeks.
All right, have a great day.
See you later.